Welcome to the Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen students of color to prepare for grad school. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Fu, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with tips and tricks and everything else you need to know to get into and successfully navigate grad school. For over 10 years, I've been helping first-gen students of color get into top grad programs in their field, and I'm really excited to support you on your academic journey too. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette, and today we get to cover one of my favorite topics, which is the topic of motherhood and cultura in grad school. I even wore my Chicana Mother Work shirt today, honoring the topic because it's really meaningful to me. But our special guest is Doctora Melissa Abeyta. Doctora Melissa is a mother, a partner, daughter, a first-gen scholar. Her impact on the field of higher ed has been demonstrated through all the avenues of her scholarly identity, through research, writing, and/or practice. Her scholarship is significant to the field of higher ed as the impact of her scholarship centers on the narratives of student populations that have traditionally and often been left in the margins of research and in practice. So welcome to the show, Doctora Melissa.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm happy to have you here too. So I would love for folks to hear more about you, about your backstory. So tell us who you are, what you do, and how did you get to become Doctora Melissa?
It was quite the journey, I will say. I think I always knew I wanted to go to college, but I didn't know what I would be when I grew up or anything like that. I'm the first in my family, in my immediate and extended family, to go to college, and I feel like I scrapped to get here. But I will say, it started with just an inquiry and observation. I feel like I don't want to go back to high school, but I'll just I guess start there. Is that I would notice, with my high school counselor, the meetings would go, my meetings would be very quick. I'd be in and out with the counselor. And then I noticed that some other students, they would be in there a lot longer. They would come out with like this whole plan for their life. And I'm like, well, where's my plan?
Wow.
Like, what about me? And so then I would request another meeting with my counselor, and I would just inquire, and they're like, oh, well, they're going to college. So, I have to spend a little bit more time with them. I'm like, okay, well, what about me? Where am I, like, which college am I going to, And it was suggested that I go to Job Corps, this was in San Diego, California. And Job Corps, if you look it up, it's probably for individuals who've dropped out of high school, who it's like a vocational kind of stepping stone, I guess you could say. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to Job Corps. I have no idea. I came home, I told my mom, and my mom's like, immediately no, like, why is the counselor suggesting Job Corps for you? And my mom thought it was problematic. So we requested meetings with the counselor, and then I started to, again, pay attention, like, okay, I'm being tracked, right? I'm being tracked into this vocational program. And so then I was just adamant, like, I want to go to college. How do I get there? And finally she said, well, there's community college. I'm like, oh, what is that? And she goes, well, you don't have to take the SATs or the ACTs, you go for a few years and then you transfer to a university. And I'm like, yes, like, sign me up. How do I do that? And I remember going on my own, I had like no support from the educational school, like the educational system. I went on my own, figured out how to, I think I took the ACTs. The results came in. I didn't even know how to read the scores. I didn't know what they meant, but I remember taking the envelope back to the counselor, like, okay, I did it. I did what everyone else is doing. Like, what does this mean? Do I get into college now? And she's like, no, you have to apply to college. I'm like, why do I keep having to ask these questions? Like, why don't you just tell me, like, what it is? Like, give me the whole roadmap so I can get there. So kind of a long story short, and I'll share this because I feel like it came up recently in a different conversation with some of my students here. But this was in California. I came to Texas, and I started at the community college here. And in the state of Texas, if you didn't graduate from the high school, you have to take this sort of like graduation exit exam. And because I didn't graduate from high school in Texas, I was immediately put in remedial classes, like remedial math, remedial English. And I would ask, like, can I be tested out of this? They said, no, it's gatekeeping. Like, you have to go through these courses. I did that for a year. I realized I didn't like it here. And so I moved back to California. And then that's when I learned that all those remedial courses I took for a year didn't transfer. And so then that's when at that experience alone, I think, was my pathway into higher ed, because I'm like, why are we doing this to people, right? And why do we have these barriers and these inequitable access, right? Like, why are we doing this to, like, not just everybody, but it's for communities of color, right? We're gatekeeping them out of college. And that's not fair, and that's not right. And so that sort of led me on this like long path to where I am today. So I finished at Southwestern Community College in Chula Vista. I transferred to San Diego State University for my bachelor's. And then I went there I was regionally bound at the time. So I went there for my bachelor's, my master's, and my doctorate. And that took about 10 years. And then during the pandemic, with my family and we decided that I would do a national search for the professorate, and that brought us back to Texas. And so now I just finished up my second year of tenure. And I know I skipped a whole bunch, but I think that's generally is essentially what motivated me to kind of focus on the research that I do and focus on educational inequities. And then now that I'm in the state of Texas, oh my gosh, I just last week, my students were telling me about these additional exams that students have to take. So not only do you have to take the high school exit exam, but when you're accepted into a Texas university, you have to take another exam. And I'm like, there's all these barriers that they have that are written into legislation, right? That are like Texas laws. And it's ridiculous. So I'm here to dismantle all of it.
Yes. And also, like, how interesting the differences in the barriers based on different states.
Yeah.
And how that just places more barriers, like you said, to communities of color. And then I know you skipped all the way to like second year, tenured, which qué felicidades, that's huge.
Thank
But
you.
also, I know that, there was at some point in your higher ed or educational journey, you became a mama. And so I would love to hear more about that side of your story too. And, at what point did you become a mom, and maybe even how that shifted or impacted, influenced your thoughts on what you've already been talking about, which is like the barriers to reaching kind of higher education for communities of color and underserved populations.
Yes. So I applied to my master's program around the same time I found that I was pregnant. And I first thought immediately, like, things like this don't happen to me because of what it took to get me there, right? Like, I'm not a person that applies to programs and I get into all of them. Like, I scrapped to get here, like I scrapped to get there. And so then when I found that I was pregnant, I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, like,
had you applied, or were you about to
I had already applied, and then I found that I was pregnant.
Oh, wow.
And then I was going through I applied, I had got like the first interview, and I was like, oh my gosh, but I'm pregnant, I'm showing. And I don't share this part often, but I think I clearly remember panicking and stressing over what to wear to the interview, because I was showing at that point. I was probably 4 months pregnant, 5 months pregnant. And I was scared that if they saw me pregnant, they wouldn't pick me for the program. They would assume that a new mother couldn't finish the graduate program and they would give my spot to somebody else. And so I remember literally finding clothing that would hide and cover my pregnancy. And I felt really ashamed about that, because I was pregnant for the first time. And I felt like this is a point, like this is something in your life that you should be happy about. You should be proud about it. You're bringing life into the world. And I was hiding it for this program, right? Because there was like this conflict of myself of, I want this, but I'm also like, I'm a mother and I want this, but I also want this. Like I want the extra degree and, you know, the career, like I want both of them. And so it was a deep internal struggle that I had. And it would be the last time that I had it, to be honest. When I started my master's program, my daughter was 7 weeks old. So she was a newborn, and everything completely changed. Like, I think for like the first 30 years of my life, I was quiet and I was silent about things. And I'm still finding my voice, but it was at that moment when I became a mother where I was like, now it's changes with me. It stops here. Like everything that I took for, or like that I was silent about previously, like I'm no longer going to be silent about, because now my daughter's watching me and she's gonna like reflect and look at this. So motherhood and being in this master's program completely changed, I think, like a fiber in me forever. But after that, I would show up to my master's program like unapologetically with her. Well, I won't say that entirely. I moved into the space unapologetically. So there's a story of one of my professors who's a mentor of mine. And I had my childcare at the time kind of fell through. And so I didn't know what to do. So I remember I had to go to class. So I drove to class with my daughter in the back seat, and I was just crying on the way to school because I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm supposed to be in class right now, but I don't have childcare. And I remember going into his office, like maybe 30 minutes before class starting. And he's like, what's going on? And I explained to him, like, I don't know what to do. Like, we have class, but my daughter's here. I'm prepared. Like, I read the chapters, like I'm prepared for class, but I don't know what to do. He was like, so what? Just sit in the back. And I'm like, well, what if she cries? He goes, well, then she cries, you step out and then you come back in. It's fine. And I was just like realizing I'm taking up space in academia, right? Like, and what the classroom looks like, it doesn't look like a mother with a baby inside. It was this very clear moment. And I tell him this to this day, like, if he had said something differently to me, it would have changed the trajectory of my life. Like that moment, I would have went home. If he would have said like, come back next week, I would have never came back. I would have been like, okay, maybe this is not for me. Maybe I'm supposed to be an at-home mother, or I'm supposed to pick something else. Like maybe I'm not supposed to be trying to do graduate school and motherhood at the same time. And I was working. So like maybe I shouldn't be doing all of this. And so I tell him his empathy at that moment really changed the trajectory of my life. And that was also like a really huge milestone that just kind of made me step into academic spaces unapologetically as a mother, right? And so there's a lot of times where I will bring my daughter. I started to bring my daughter, as she got older, when it was appropriate, to study groups or, like to presentations when it was feasible, right? Like I feel like when there were, or, sometimes for two reasons. One, it was if I needed to as a childcare, and for two, if it was a moment where she could see me in that space, like as she got older. And yeah, she's just, everyone who I've met since then, it's like, it's a package deal. You have me and my daughter, like it's everyone, knows about me and my kid. Like we're no longer, it's no longer like two separate things. It's not something that I'm not willing to kind of hide or to be ashamed about at all. One thing I jot down was NASPA, right? This National Student Affairs Organization. And I just, gosh, a couple of years ago, they had registration for their annual conference. And
I think I know what you're gonna say.
Yeah.
Oh.
If you bring a guest, they charge for the guest. And then for 1 year, out of nowhere, they decided to charge for children. And it really, really bothered me. And I did it. I posted it on my stories. IG stories is like my safe spot, right? Twitter, I'm like, I don't know about Twitter sometimes.
I'm the same way.
Yeah. IG stories, I go off on IG stories all the time. So I posted it on IG stories one weekend and I got like a really big response from it. And I'm like, you know what? Because it's not right? And Melania, my daughter, had been to NASPA with me before as like a 4-year-old. And I can understand if they had childcare places for our children, or they were going to do like children activities, like there were reasons to charge, but I'm like, there's no reason to charge a minor who's not doing anything, and who's actually, it's the decision to take a child to a conference is such a difficult decision that a parent's making. And they're probably making it because there's no other choice.
Yeah.
Like there's no childcare. Like, I don't think they understand, like, it's 10 times harder to travel with kids to a conference than it is to go home. And then the fact that you're going to charge them, that was just over the top for me. And so I ended up tweeting about it, and I'm not going to say it was my doing, because I will say that thankfully there were senior faculty that backed it up. And I think it was their voices that kind of elevated the situation, that by Monday they had completely removed the charges and like taken it down from the website. And so it's like that like just advocating for student parents, I think is what's critical. Like, even what's ironic is that I went to the conference and my daughter didn't go. I had no intentions of my daughter going, but they were asking like, hey, where's Melania? You tweeted about the thing. I'm like, oh yeah, she was never coming. That wasn't for me. That was because it's deterring a parent who potentially was going to go, or a student parent who was going to go and had no other option. And you just made it harder for them, right? You're creating these barriers for them. But at that particular time, like, I had no intention on taking my kid, but I felt like I just had to say something because it was wrong, right? And I try to think about that in kind of like different aspects. Like, we don't think about our student parents often, right? We don't think about if we're having events for them on campus, like, is there childcare, or are there children activities? Like, is it feasible for them? We kind of ignore this population in general. And I think I went on a way other tangent, but
no. This really it ties in because I mean, that's another question that I was going to ask you. You talked about how motherhood completely shifted things for you, and you're like, okay, I'm a different person from here on out. I'm going to be speaking up more, showing up more, taking up more space, advocating more. And then talking about, wow, the power of mentorship, and how if it hadn't been for that professor and his supportive response to you, maybe, I don't know, maybe you might have been pushed out, like so many other mamas have been pushed out of higher ed. But then, that prompted me to want to ask, like, how did this experience of becoming a mother and mothering in graduate school then impact the way that you now advocate on behalf of student parents, and you support parenting students, mothers who are, in your own surroundings now as a professor. And you gave a perfect example, because that was actually so big that I remember seeing that. And I remember we reposted that on the Chicana Mother Work IG too. Like, it was a big deal. It was among all my mother scholar friends. I know we were all kind of like, what is going on? This is not okay. How dare they? Like, what? Why would they do this? And we already struggle so much to even have any spaces that provide care or childcare options, but then to add an additional barrier, that's just nonsense. So are there other ways that you find yourself advocating on behalf of student parents? Because it's been, I don't know how long since you were a graduate student, and there are more conversations, and I see more folks talking about this and embracing and kind of having more active conversations, especially online, about being a student parent, about being a mom and being a mama scholar or mother scholar. But there's still a lot of barriers, and there's still, I mean, institutions of higher ed still don't necessarily always support or provide services that support parenting students.
They really don't. And for some reason, I feel like there's this stigma that just exists about it. Last fall, or last like winter graduation, my daughter had a school event. And what happened was the commencement, they changed the dates. Our commencements used to be on Saturdays. They changed it to Fridays, like right in the middle of the day. And we're required to go as faculty. And my daughter had a school event. And after her event, they're dismissed, and they rarely get dismissed early here in Texas. And so I had a dilemma. One, I had to go to her event, but then two, I had to like bring her with me to commencement, because I'm always in these spaces where I don't have childcare and these at these random moments. Usually I do, but it's just there's these pockets of times where I don't. And so I remember telling my department chair, I'm gonna be about 10 minutes late. I'm gonna sneak in the back, and I'm sneaking in the back with my daughter. Okay, because again, I'm in this space in this region where we don't know anybody. I don't know anybody here. And I don't know anybody, and I don't even trust anyone else to watch my child, especially because I don't know anyone. And so she's coming with me. He was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And I will never forget the death stares I got from my colegas, who were just like, oh my, like the whispers. I was like, she's got her kid with me. I said, yes, I do. Turn around and like watch the front, and she's gonna sit there and not bother anybody. She's 10 years old, and she can eat, it'll be fine. And one, it was to her kind of like come to like work with mommy day, whatever. But it's also like just remind me, like, I'm gonna continue to like decolonize academic spaces and make it completely uncomfortable for everybody, because why should it be uncomfortable though, right? Like, we are humans, we are mothers, we have other identities other than being a professional, and it's okay that they blend sometimes. And so I just, oh my gosh, it really, I think you really realize who people are in moments like that, like who's supportive and who's not supportive, and like, okay, got you. Like, but it was also kind of, again, for her to see like, this is what mommy does, like, this is mommy's work. And then it's also not even for that. I also intentionally take up that space again for the like student mothers, the student parents, so they can see it too. Like, no, like if you need your kid to come through commencement and sit next to you, it's gonna be okay. There's plenty of chairs. There's often empty chairs. Like, the world's not gonna end because there's, a child sitting next to somebody. And it's also, it's kind of like, I think, hypocritical of how we treat our children, like of like what society says about children too, like that they should just be able to take up space. And I feel like they're often not given that permission, right? Just to kind of coexist amongst us. So given my positionality now, I'm definitely more purposeful or intentional with taking up that space. Other times is I do two things in my classroom. First, the beginning of the class is I send out like this like survey before class starts, and I want to know who my students are, like, before in their classroom. And I think that's almost, for me, like, it calms my anxiety, like, it's like the first day of school, but like I don't know who they are, just off a list of names. And
do you ask them like, like, who are you, or like describe yourself, or how? I'm just curious.
I have a whole, so this is the one thing that I do good. This is the one thing that I streamlined that I do really good.
Oh, because I'm thinking of the folks who listen to my podcast who are also instructors and professors who are like,
this is from my femtor, Dr. Vasquez, because I think I tweaked it a little bit, but it's like an intake form. It's like your name, your pronouns, your title, institution that you are, and then your, like, what other identities you have. Are you a caretaker? Are you a parent? And I ask that because I feel it's important to know the student holistically, right? Because to acknowledge that, okay, you are a student, but you also wear these other hats and different variations, right? So I think it's just important to know. One, I have a whole nother like thought about grading and that being a social construct. But in the event somebody is going through something and it's like, oh, well, yeah, remember, they're a caretaker for their elderly parents and they're a mother of three, right? Like, they have a lot going on. So just to have some empathy, right? Like, as we're moving through the semester. And so I ask that, and then going in, I also introduce myself. It's also like a shared space. It's also a reminder that we both have multiple identities. Like, they're sharing their piece with me, but I'm also going to introduce myself and Melania on the first day of school, like, through an image. But also to know, like, I guess of two ways. One, if we're having class online, that is completely okay and should be normalized for children to be in the background, or, like, don't feel embarrassed if you have to Zoom, cam off or whatever because you are taking care of things at home. Like, I completely understand. And then also, if we have our face-to-face class, if you ever need to bring your children to class, like it's completely, I want to normalize that space or like that from the jump. So I think I haven't taught face-to-face in a minute, like probably in a year. But the last class that I did teach face-to-face, I brought my daughter to like we had and me disrupting academia. Our last class was at a restaurant. And so instead of doing like formal presentations, we just had like a plática, like a discussion while we were eating. And then so I brought my daughter in that sense, because I want her to see, she does see me away and travel like a lot. So again, in any time that I can incorporate her or I can bring her in, like that evening class, it kind of worked out. I was like, perfect. Hop in the car, come with me. Let's go to class because it's an hour away.
Yeah.
And then, just kind of, I don't know, just sit amongst the classmates and just like kind of listen and tune in. But it's also something for the students because they're all educators. They're all probably, kind of like administrators in their sense. Most of my students are K-12 administrators. And then I have some students that are in the higher ed sphere, but, it's just to normalize it and to kind of give them. I'm also in a region that's very traditional. So it's like Latin, like 98% Latin, and it's very different. And so
What do you mean by traditional?
That's a good question. I would say traditional Mexican American, that the women should be at home.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And so it's not normalized. It's still like not normalized that, or it's still a new thought for like women to be in doctoral programs down here. That's pushing the envelope. And so then even furthermore, when you have parents that are like, student mothers that are going through these programs, like I feel they are also in this tug of war with their families and with, the institution. And so I try to break that by saying like, it's okay to incorporate family with your academics and whatnot.
That's really good. I love everything that you shared, especially of like shifting the norms of like what a traditional classroom looks like, and having this like final class in we said like having dinner or in some sort of like restaurant setting or eating setting. I love that. But what you were just sharing right now about how like you're in this more traditional space with folks who especially if they're women, may not be expected to be pursuing a career, especially even less if they're moms. It reminds me of this concept of cultural straddling. So it's like both straddling different identities and also like straddling different cultures and the different expectations. And I wanted to ask you about that too, because you're not just talking about the experience of motherhood in academia. There are plenty of books about motherhood in academia that focus on white moms, but in your case, you're talking about mothers of color, Latina moms, and in the space that you're at, you're in a predominantly Mexican area. So how has culture impacted the way that you have navigated higher ed, and also the way that you currently support students? So maybe your cultural background and also the background of your students.
I think I personally had a different experience in that my mother, so I would say I was a military child. So we moved around a lot. And so in that, my mom, I'm an only child. So my mom and I would often have to learn these spaces for ourselves, right? And so I think that gave my mom a lot of independence, right? And so then my mom taught me that, like, so in that sense, I think culturally I was raised differently, right? I wasn't
That's
raised
so interesting.
norms.
I didn't know that about you.
And so one of our first duty stations was in Puerto Rico, and which is another thing. The language is, while it's Spanish, it's very different Spanish than from Texas, where my mom was born and raised. And so my mom had to learn almost a whole new dialect and like navigate I mean, everything, like learning how to get a driver's license, learning, the banking system, learning the schooling system, which is different from the US
Yeah.
mainland. And so I think in her having to kind of navigate that for herself, she kind of went through her own independence and then like kind of instilled that into me. And so I mean, I guess back to when I was challenged with like motherhood and higher ed, I remember her saying, or even probably when I was going into the doc program, because I applied and I'm throwing my name in the hat. I'm applying this year, but I don't expect to get it this year. I'm applying to go through the process to learn, but I really had thought I would get it the following year. And I didn't know, I ended up getting it that first year that I applied. And I was like, oh no, like I want this, but again, I wanted it next year. And I call it like, we have a family meeting, like, because my parents live with us. So in my household, it's myself, my partner, my daughter, and my parents. And my mom says, no, you're going to do it now because Melania was younger. And she goes, it's quote unquote easier to do it when they're younger than when they're much older. She's like, when she's older, she's going to need you more.
Wow.
She's going to be going through emotional development. Like she's going to need her mom's attention a little bit more. Right now is the perfect age for you to be gone and you to focus on your studies, because she's not going to remember this kind of part of you being gone. And so in that sense, I was like, okay, I'm although every semester I'll be like, I'm done with school, like I'm quitting this. And they'd be like, okay, are you done are you done? Like, are you done ranting? Did you get it all out your system? I'm like, yeah. They're like, okay, go finish your paper. go finish. I mean, I would always have this like moment with myself where I'm not going to finish school. But so I think for me it was different. I was given it. I had a family unit that it was I think it goes back to that cultural piece, right? It's kind of like it's all of ours, right? It's not just me going through it. So in that sense, like I had help. I had a village with raising my daughter. So even to this day, like when my daughter starts school, I'll meet the teacher and then I let them know like there's going to be points throughout the year where I may not be available or I may not be able to go to something, but somebody from my family will be there. If it's not my partner, it's my mom. And if neither of them are available, like my dad will go. But at some point, like, trust me that they're all reporting back to me. And so just know that there will always be some family member to support my daughter at anything if I can't be there. And so I think that's the difference in cultural is that, and I see that here with my students, right? Is that there's these family units of support that we have, and that's so critical. And I also want them to kind of also like, y'all realize is like some of my students have never read like Yoso's Community Culture Wealth or
that's exactly what I was about to say. That's the cultural wealth right there.
Yeah, they've never been introduced to it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like y'all have to see this because you all are living this, right? Like I'm like, even one of my students, she's going to be my first doctoral student who advanced to candidacy. But the day before she was advancing, she's the mother of 3 and her husband works kind of like not always in the region, right? He travels for work. And so she has her mom there to support her and her sister. And I remember she's like, I kind of like didn't know what to do. And I said, you know what? Because it was online. I'm like, if you need to come to my house and your kids need to stay, in the living room, and I need to put you in a different room so that you can present your material to the rest of the committee, we will do. She lives actually right down the street from me. I was like, we will do that. And this was during a time, this was just 2 weeks ago where we had like really bad storms. So a lot of the area has been out of electricity for days. And so I'm checking with these students. It was really hard to kind of schedule them, right? So it's like, do we risk rescheduling it and then further delaying their process? Or do we just like, what support do you need?
Wow.
Entirely, like not just you as a student, but I understand that you have a family, like, and this is the middle of STAR testing for us in Texas with our kids have, these
standardized
state
tests,
exams, standardized tests. Yeah. And they cannot be rescheduled. So we're in the middle of a storm. There's power outs. We have STAR exams. And so I'm just like, what support do you need? Like, if you need to come to I have electricity. If you need to come here and we need to like put people in different rooms, we can do that for an hour. But it's just letting the students know that they're like, at least in me, like they have a like community. Like I'm here to support in however that I can. But I think the students who I chair and who I are in my classroom, they're amazing. These group of students in the Valley are so special in such a beautiful way. Like, I've learned a lot from them, and I continue to learn a lot from them. But we have these moments of, of frustration with legislation and whatnot. But it's like, I know that that at the end of the day, we're in community.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that and for sharing such a powerful example, because that's real. That's like life, life happens, storms happen, all kinds of things happen. And your students know that you have their back and that you see them like as a whole person. You see all of their circumstances, not just like, okay, you got to figure it out no matter what. And I don't want to hear about it. Which is what some of us experience, unfortunately, in our higher ed journeys. But also that goes to show that you have an awareness of like where they're coming from and like the type of support that they need and the value of community too. I wanted to ask you, we're going to get close to kind of to wrapping up, but I definitely want to hear your thoughts or words of advice or consejos that you have for any students, specifically mothers, mothers who are also first-gen moms, and even parenting students who are listening to this episode or who listen to it and are maybe not quite, maybe they're in that path of like, I'm trying to figure out how to go back to school. So maybe they're trying to figure out going from CC to college or from college to grad school. And yeah, like what words of advice would you give them as they kind of go on their own journey?
I would say that you're not alone. I know that it feels alone because there were plenty and many of times where I felt that I was doing it alone. And then you have to find your community and find that however that works for you. So whether it can be virtual or in the physical space. So I ended up finding my community virtually through Instagram. And I think that really saved me because it made me feel like I wasn't. Yeah, while I was in my doc program, I was commuting an hour. And I remember driving. And I mean, it was hard, right? Like I'm working full time. I'm in a doctoral program. I'm a mother and my daughter goes to school an hour away from where I work and where my school is. And so I would just be alone in my thoughts a lot for an hour. And I'm like, there's no way that I'm the only one dealing with this. Like I cannot be the only one dealing with this and struggling through this or feeling like I'm struggling through this, like alone, like where are the other moms? Like, where are the other parents? Like, we have to be out here. And so that's where I started my Instagram, The Academic Soul, just to kind of vlog, like mini vlog, like one, to find other people, like where are the other mommy scholars at, and how can we support or just uplift or just know that we're not alone in that space. And then, just kind of like a quick hello. I will tell you, there's so many times where other moms or like student parents would send me just a message or like a meme or like a you got this or like you DM, and it may seem like nothing, but those little messages literally keep you going.
Yes.
When you feel like you're doing it alone and you don't know, you can't see yourself at the end of the finish line, but those messages just keep you going all the way through. And so that's where I go back to say, like, find your community and however you can find it. Like for me, that community was virtual. And so if you need a virtual community, or if you can find that community on your campus, and then if that community, if you think it does not exist on your campus, create it. Because there's other student parents also there that are maybe feel invisible or are currently invisible, but they shouldn't be, right? Like they should be supported. So I would just encourage you to find your community on campus, off campus, and just keep going. And I promise it gets better. And you just keep going. I just recently I had someone share with me that they were accepted into a doctoral program, and they were nervous because they weren't sure if it was the right time, because they got a promotion and they have children. And I said, I don't think there's ever a right time. Life is going to always happen. Always. There's never going to be a perfect time where all the stars align. It's just a matter of figuring it out and figuring out like, okay, there's going to have to be some adjustments, and you make those adjustments as you go. And then just keep going. And, I think that's why I keep oversharing my life, because I don't know. I feel like, okay, not that I do it, you can do it type of thing, but it's just to know that you're not alone, right?
Yes.
Like we're not alone in these thoughts and these aspirations, that we can continue to uplift each other and help each other authentically, because that's also very much needed. I think we are against traditional norms. And so that if we can find community and find each other, I want to say, there's a fellow Chingona who I've connected with online, and she's a single mother who's amazing. And she posts like at 4 a.m. where she's up doing laundry. And I was up that early too, working. And so I get her like, these are like secret mom hours, right?
Yes, they are.
They're secret mom hours. I was like, hey, good morning, I'm upgrading. And I don't post it because I'm also like conflict. I feel like there's this, battle against like hustle, what's it called?
Yeah.
Like hustle mentality, or I don't want people to think I'm like contributing to hustle culture, but it's also like, it's me surviving, right? And then so part of me is like conflicted, like, do I share this moment because this is the real, like this is really how I feel like I have to survive, because we're against this capitalist society. But it is what it is, right? It's like, if I want to have all these things, or I want to do all these things, I have to find the time in when everybody else is sleeping sometimes to get my work done.
I feel that way. So because I work at all hours,
Yeah.
but I don't work all the time at all hours.
Right.
So sometimes I'm like sending messages and it's late at night or really early morning. And I'm like, I know I'm like really into not grinding and resting and all that, but like you said, you just got to find those pockets of time and do what works best for you.
Yeah. And then I would say that people think I start my day. Well, I do start my day early, but I'm also like, recently I've been running like at 10 a.m, but I am going to work until 11 o'clock at night, or, it varies and it flows. Like I may take a 2-hour break, when my daughter gets home, so that we connect, we have dinner, or she has an appointment. And then it's like, okay, then I go teach a class, and, it works for me. Yes. And I think that's figure out what works for you and what you're comfortable with, and do that. And support each other in that, right? Like everyone's okay to have a different schedule. It's also like, I don't think cognitively I could do a 9 to 5. Like I need to have breaks. I needed to be like, my schedule needs to be fluid. And like, I'm inspired at different times of the day. Like, it's just, and I think that's okay. Like we're not machines in the sense where, we need to be bogged down, this time to this time, and that's it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I wanted to just ask one last question. If there are any other words of advice or closing words that you wanted to share, and if not, for folks who resonated with what you shared, who want to connect further, who want to support you in your work or find you and contact you in some way, shape, or form, how can they connect? How can they reach you?
Yes, so you can connect with me on Instagram at Academic Soul. I am currently updating my website, melissaabeyta.com. If you wanted to, I don't know, bring me to your campus. We didn't talk much about my research, but my research focuses on formerly incarcerated and system impacted students. And so I usually am brought to campuses to speak about that. So
you can say a little bit more about that. I would love for you to, if you have a couple more minutes, to share a little bit more about your research, because I think that's really important too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's critical. So I have family members that are currently informally incarcerated. So I identify as system impacted. And I really was drawn to this work because one, at the time it wasn't happening. And I really was curious if the student population existed on our campuses. And if they did, what kind of support services are available for them and whatnot. And my research work started in California, which California is making strides and they're doing amazing out there. And there's programming in all of the California higher educational systems at the community colleges and at the 4 years. So California is doing great work. I'm currently in the state of Texas where I am experiencing the stigma, right? Not to say that the stigma doesn't exist in California, but that there's a little bit of more stigma that exists here in Texas, which it's like, okay, yes, the student population can be on our campuses. How do we invite them on our campuses? And then more so, how do we create programs and services for them? And then not just also, again, track them back to vocational programs, right? Because that's what we really do see a lot happening. It's like, how do we track them into actually degree granting programs?
Yes.
And then how do we educate the staff and faculty and administrators in knowing like what's available for this population? It's a very invisible population that's been discarded by our society. And so I think you'll find me in advocating for them to have spaces on our campuses.
That's amazing. I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I was, when I first reached out to you, I wasn't sure like which route you were going to go. And there was a part of me that was like, I hope she talks about this research because it is, I mean, I've worked with formerly incarcerated students. I've worked with folks who have been part of the like underground scholars, and I get chills thinking just about how amazing these folks are and that we need to have more of these types of programs and support services, not just like you said in California, which was kind of where I was exposed to this kind of work, but across the nation, including, like you said, Texas and other states where it continues to be stigmatized. So thank you for sharing that. And keep doing that work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So you said folks can reach you on Instagram, and then where else so that we can make sure to get that in the show notes?
Yes, on my website, melissaabeyta.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Doctora Melissa. It's been so awesome hearing from you, hearing about your journey, hearing about your experiences, how do you continue to advocate for a wide range of student populations. I really, really appreciated having you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me in the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review of the podcast. If you leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, you become eligible for a free half-hour coaching session with me. Yes, that's right, 1 free session. Once you leave a review, you can email me a screenshot and I'll send you a link to sign up. The second way to show your love is to get yourself a copy of my free 15-page Grad School Femtoring kit, which includes resources on research, organization, grad school, and career prep. Go to gradschoolfemtoring.com/kit to get it today. The third and last way to support my show is to follow me on social media. I am on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and occasionally TikTok with the handle @Grad School Femtoring. Thanks again, and until next time.